Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Every summer, we're joined by the one and only Warren Sharp, who puts together his great NFL preview book every summer, comes on, talks with us about the book, the Giants chapter. Warren, always good to talk to you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really looking forward to this conversation. The Giants seem to be that interesting hot button team where no matter who you actually root for, everybody sort of has some sort of an opinion about the Giants. So it's kind of neat that they've gotten all this publicity over the last couple of years, especially with the Daniel Jones contract the other year. But it's going to be great to talk to you about them. And I'm certainly looking forward to getting this preseason underway and actually seeing some live football flying through the air and some guys hitting each other. It's going to be a lot of fun here over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and being on Hard Knocks doesn't hurt either with teams trying to pay attention to what you're doing, right? And by the way, just so fans understand, this is going to air a little bit later, maybe a week from now, but we're recording this the afternoon of the first preseason game on August 1st. So if anything happens between now and then, you know why we did not talk about it. Before we get into the Giants, Warren, tell them about your book, where you can find it. I know you set up a special promotion for Giant fans as well.
We did. It's over 500 pages of in-depth analysis about all 32 teams. I got a copy of it, printed copy of it right here. John has the PDF, but we have this available up at sharp.football, and you can get it for 50% off. So a special for you Giant fans. All you do is enter the code GIANTS and you'll get 50% off. And I think we're going to share a lot about the Giants today, but there's a lot of very useful information, still more than what we're going to be able to discuss about the Giants in the book, but also the other 31 teams. Whether you're into fantasy betting, whatever case might be, you're going to find something useful inside there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great book. The information and the data in there is fantastic. So Warren, let's start kind of a big picture deal, right? We did this around the same time last year, and we talked about dangerous areas of regression for the Giants coming off that extraordinary playoff run in 2022. One was their ability to win so many close games, but you also pinpointed some other areas that did end up regressing that maybe is some of the reasons why the record turned around a little bit last year.
Yeah, I mean, one of them was just their production inside of the red zone. That kind of is scoring points is what wins games. And the fact that they were so good at scoring points back in 2022, and then they really struggled when they were down inside of the red zone in 2023. That was one of the danger areas that we mentioned because red zone is, the way that I look at red zone, yeah, a great play caller will absolutely help inside of the red zone. However, if your team is all of a sudden a top 12, top 10 team inside the red zone, but over the rest of the field, the other 80 yards, you're below average, well below average at times, like that's that's not normal, right? That's not normal for you to be outstanding inside of the red zone and terrible elsewhere. And so those things are much more likely to regress. And that's what happened to the New York Giants last season after they were number 1 in ranking in success rate in 2022. That dropped all the way down to number 30 last year, which you guys obviously painfully saw firsthand. Of course, we're going to talk about the injuries and how those factored into the fact that you guys weren't great inside of the red zone, but that was definitely one of those areas. Health wasn't great. There's a lot of things that we thought may have problems this upcoming season. And frankly, John, that's why the odds makers leading into the 2023 season, and I'll just throw this disclaimer out there. Even if you don't like betting on anything, it's interesting to see what these guys who do this for a living in terms of the odds makers say about your team. They're the ones who are studying it, trying to figure out what expectations should be for this team. And they did not have high expectations for you guys entering last season, even though you had a great run to the playoffs and you were able to escape with so many close game wins and you were able to win a playoff game. The expectations were for you to fall back to earth hard in 2023. I think your win total was like only 7.5. You were expected to really struggle, and lo and behold, that's what ended up happening.
And third down was another metric you mentioned that regressed a little bit. They had the highest, I think, second highest average yards to go on third down, which is obviously something that's hard to overcome. And then we got into 2023. And in our conversation last year, we talked about just, especially at the start of the year, the consecutive really tough pass defenses the Giants had to play at the start of the year, from Dallas to San Francisco. Miami was in there too. Then you have those tough opponents combined with the offensive line, starting with Andrew Thomas falling apart in the injuries, Warren, and then it's really a situation. I went back, because I watched every game, I rewatched every game. But back in May, just to remember, I went back, I watched every Daniel Jones snap, and it was honestly worse than I remembered it, watching the protection and what he had to deal with up front. You had a great stat in your book. I think you had him at 68% pressure rate in the game against Dallas to start the year, which I think was the highest individual game pressure rate since 2000. Or there was some kind of crazy number like that you had in there. But just the circumstances early in the year between the injuries and the defenses they were facing, they really didn't have much of a chance offensively.
No, they didn't. And we could talk a little bit more in detail about Daniel Jones and this pressure, because it still could be a situation this year that he's going to have to navigate and deal with, even though you added a couple guys to the offensive line. But yeah, that week one game, he had over 40 dropbacks, had 42 dropbacks, and was pressured on 67% of them. I went back through since 2000. There's not another player who was pressured on over 40 plus dropbacks that was pressured at a higher rate than Daniel Jones. He set the record, and I can't go back beyond 2000. So we're talking 23 years to 24 years, including 2000. He was the highest, most pressured player in week one of anybody. And he was sacked on 20% of his dropbacks in week one. In the 5 years, most recent 5 years, there's been 3 games where a quarterback has been dropped back to pass at least 40 times and was sacked at least 20% of those. 2 of those 3 were Daniel Jones games last year. That just shows you how terrible like the pass protection was. And of course, what was the stat? They gave up 85 sacks, which is an NFL record. And their sack margin was minus 51. Once again, I can only go back to 2000 with some of these numbers, and I couldn't find another team that had a sack margin close to that. I mean, the next closest team was minus 41. The Giants were at minus 51. So just, we know it wasn't all Daniel Jones, right? Because Daniel Jones got injured in part because of this line. So Daniel Jones wasn't there. We know your backups aren't going to be able to avoid the pass rush quite as adeptly. And then you're talking about third stringers and guys that are rookies that shouldn't even necessarily be starters in the NFL that are being thrust in there. So naturally, some of that is the fault of those, the backups and the backups to the backups, as well as your offensive line, as you mentioned with Andrew Thomas. But that being said, this is something that must change. And like at some point in this conversation, we should dig into, Daniel Jones and how much of that he controls personally. But that was something that was a big factor last year and has to improve this year if the Giants have any hope of seeing success.
Yeah, and the Giants, they could have as many as 3 different stars on the offensive line. We'll see how that goes with Evan Neal trying to make his way back. And so let's get into Daniel Jones, because I think we've shown analytically over the years that quarterbacks certainly have a high control over their sack rate, right? Quarterbacks control that. To a lesser extent, they control their pressure rate. And I thought what was interesting, you list the pressure and sack rates for all 3 Giant starters last year. And all 3 had a decent amount of run, right? They all started at least 3 games, DeVito, Taylor, and Jones. And Jones by far had the highest sack rate and pressure rate. What was interesting to me is that he actually had the lowest average time to throw among those 3 guys too. And I think 14th, if I remember off the top of my head, in the league in terms of average time to throw. So while, yes, I agree the quarterbacks do control it, I thought it was interesting that a lot of times quarterbacks that get those high pressure rates, Warren, they're guys like Justin Fields, who holds the ball a long time. They scramble around, they invite pressure. Jones's average time to throw actually was not that high last year, despite the fact that he had all those pressures and sacks. So again, to your point, once you see pressure getting rid of the ball, that's how you limit that sack rate as a quarterback.
Yeah, and sacks are drive killers. And the Giants, when they take a sack, their points per drive drops dramatically. The entire league does. So they're not immune to that, but they are actually below average in how much a sack impacts them, how much less likely you are to score points of any kind on a drive when you take a sack. So you have to do everything that you can to avoid the sack. Now, one thing that I have started to believe even more. We know that quarterbacks, as you alluded to, they control to a higher extent than we used to think their sack rate. But that pressure rate itself, I mean, the dropbacks where you're getting pressure in like a second and a half, it's hard to do much about that, right? But the one thing that I think is under discussed is the fact that a good quarterback, if you're getting pressured that quickly, unless your offensive lineman just gets completely run over, which could happen, there's a very good chance that you have the wrong slide in the protection. You're doing something at that line of scrimmage that could improve. You could be doing something better,
Well, that's
whether
fair.
it's anticipate the defense, check to a better play, check to a different protection scheme, get that ball out super quickly, or do something else to audible into something better for your offensive line. And, when I look back the last 2 years, now last year, a lot of injuries, etc. But even in 2022, they win that playoff game. Out of 45 quarterbacks that had at least 300 pass attempts on early downs, which is the time that the defense might be playing the run, you're not likely to be blitzed as often. Daniel Jones ranked 44 out of 45 quarterbacks in pressure rate, 44 out of 45 quarterbacks in sack rate, and 41 out of 45 quarterbacks in sacks per pressure taken. And these are things that Daniel Jones must improve this season. And that's where I do have a little bit of questions, John, with regard to coming off this knee injury. Is he 100%? He certainly looks okay. You'll be able to fill us in a little bit more about what you've seen up there at camp and how close to 100% he is. It's great to see him out there, and it seems what I'm reading, participating in basically everything.
Yeah.
But he's got to be able to make those decisions to scramble if he needs to, because those plays are the highest upside. If you go back to 2022, say, hey, the Giants won a bunch of games in 2022. They had some success. Daniel Jones was, extending these drives. They were marching down the field. Most of that efficiency was not by him dropping back and passing the ball. A lot of it was the scrambles. And so the best play in football, we talked about this last year, remind the listeners, the single best play in football in terms of EPA per play is a designed pass play where the quarterback sees a run lane open up and he, boom, just goes and takes that run lane and scrambles with the football, where the defense is playing pass, but he sees the opportunity to run. These are plays that have a really high floor. You're gaining 7, 8, 9 yards per play on average. An average drop back is like 7.5 to 8.5 yards, right? So you're basically, that assumes a lot of things, right? Your receivers got to catch the ball. You have to be accurate enough with the pass. A lot has to go right to get that number, whereas these run plays have such a high floor. So he's got to continue to be able to take those with that knee injury. But I just feel like the coaching staff and Jones has to work on more things at that line of scrimmage, pre-snap, to get the right play call in, to make the adjustment if necessary based on the way that you anticipating coverage coming. Have you watched enough film to pick up on all these things like Manning or Brady would do at the line of scrimmage, to make those split-second adjustments that must occur so that you can buy that extra second before you get pressured or before you take a sack? And then also, once that snap happens, where are you moving and shifting yourself in the pocket based upon where you think that pressure might be coming from? How quickly are you getting through your progressions to get rid of the ball before you're pressured? There's a lot of things that quarterbacks could do to control the pressure, not just the sacks. Jones needs to improve in that area. Obviously, Giants fans are hoping that he's going to this upcoming season.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
You mentioned the early down success or lack thereof. Why don't we go there next, Warren, as you brought that up? And you're right. That's when you get a lot of your explosive plays, right? You're in play action on early downs. You get the ball down the field. Anecdotally, just rewatching a lot of those plays last year, one, there are way too many where the Giants run in play action. They're protecting with 6 or 7 guys, only putting 2 or 3 guys into the route. And the other team's still getting pressure with 4, right? That would be a really good explanation for why your early down offense is not going well. But that is really, the early down success for you is really one of the areas, right, where the Giants have to get better at in 2024. If this offense, really, they've been in the doldrums for much of the last 4 or 5 years, averaging under 20 points per game. You have to be able to do better on early downs throwing the football.
You have to do better on early downs throwing the football, and you have to do it at the beginning of games. I mean, one of the biggest things for me, if you would say, what are and you just mentioned it, in fact, like a couple of the most important things that they have to do. We basically hit on several of them, but to round it out, we talked about the red zone. That's got to improve year over year. That has to improve. But even before you do that, because the red zone is like what happens at the end of a drive, you have to be able to get down there, and you have to be able to do it at the beginning of the game. And so to me, it's early down offense at the beginning of the game, in the first quarter of games. It's generating these explosives, and it's protecting your quarterback. Those are kind of the biggest three that are going to affect everything else. If you're good there, you may not encounter as many third downs. And so the Giants, the third down issues that we discussed, where they were 30th in distance to go on third down, and they were also 30th in conversion rate, like that's not going to impact you quite as much if you're more efficient on early downs. And to get to the red zone, you have to be good enough over the other 80 yards of the football field. And guess what? You can also skip the red zone by being explosive on a 30-yard line, on a 35, and converting a touchdown at that point. So if you simply score first in these games, get early scoring, which the Giants are number 32 last year, and they were 32 the year before. So this is not just well, the offense was beat up last year, backup quarterback, so let's write off and ignore what happened in 2023. In 2022, you guys were dead last on first quarter scoring, and you were the same dead last in first quarter scoring last year. If I could do one thing, it's Daboll and Kafka get in that lab, mix up a bunch of things that are going to result in you guys scoring in the first quarter of games, because John, that just tracks so well with ability to win games. And I think I went back and looked, I don't know if it was over the last 2 years or what it was, but when the Giants are up at halftime, their results, I think they're like 11-3
11
1
2 and 1 is what I have in my notes here. Yeah.
Okay.
11 2
yeah,
and 1.
so you're planning on covering on this as well, and you probably got the notes more handy than I do. They're great in those games, and they're exceeding expectations, but when they fall behind early and they can't be close at halftime, they're not winning these games. And these games could be won in the first half, and particularly into the first quarter of games. And that's where they really have to make those adjustments this year. And that's not just on execution, it's on the play calls, it's on the game plans, it's on everything that goes into how do we start games. And Daboll was really good at that in Buffalo. And that's something that this team has to get a lot better at here in New York in 2024.
Yeah, I'm going to get to Daboll in a little bit. And, you kind of referenced this already. Really, maybe the two most important things, Warren, to scoring points in this league is sack avoidance. You mentioned how that kills plays. In last year's book, I remember you had a great stat where, the percent of drives you score with a sack versus without, and it's just astronomically different. And then explosive plays. The Giants only did 3.9% explosive play rate last year, which was towards the bottom of the league. And I remember in last year's book, too, you had another stat where, the percent chance you score in a drive when you have a play that I think 15 yards or more was the best benchmark number that you had. It goes up 5 to 6 times better chance of scoring if you have a play at 15 plus yards. So those are two areas where the Giants really struggled last year, where that, to me, sack avoidance and explosive plays, that has to be at the top of the list, along with, again, early scoring, if things are going to get better this year.
Yeah, but that's the thing, John, is that some of these things, like, the red zone, it was worse last year. Okay, well, maybe that was because of the injuries or third downs. The things that you just talked about, first quarter scoring, sack avoidance, and explosive plays, fans need to know, this is not just a 2023 problem. This was a problem in 2022 as well. They overcame those things with a lot of big leverage plays late in games, and they were able to win a lot of those close games. And that's not the way that you can bank wins in the NFL and be consistent. You have to fix those other three areas. And there were problems in 2022. There are problems in 2023. The staff really has to focus on improving in those three areas if they're going to have success. And it's not going to be a little bit of improvement. It needs to be a lot of improvement, because they're literally like dead last in the NFL and pretty much all these marks. They're dead last in explosive play rate. I looked in 2022, even though they were healthier, they gained 20 plus yards in only 3.9% of their plays. That was dead last in the NFL. So they have to improve from dead last to at least close to league average. But it doesn't take a lot. Like, these couple areas, just focus a little bit more, generate a couple more explosive plays each half, 1.5 maybe, figure out a way to score more points in the first quarter. If you emphasize that, you emphasize a little bit more explosiveness, all of a sudden these games are winnable. You don't have to come from behind. You don't have to have a lot of great variance go your way. You just need to finish these games off. And it's so much easier for both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. Let's face it, it's tough on your defense. If your defense is always playing from behind, the other team's in a position of strength in the second half of games, and they got their full playbook open. They can run the ball. They can pass it short. They can pass it deep. They can call a play to avoid a blitz. Just as long as they don't get sacked, they're happy. Meanwhile, if you're playing from a deficit, if you're the opponent, you're pushing it. Every single play has got to be a hit. You can't avoid any negatives. You got to figure out how to score points quickly. You're more predictable offensively in what you're doing, and that makes life a lot easier on your defense. So I'm optimistic about your new defensive coordinator. I liked what he did down in Tennessee. I think that there's some upside here and the pieces that he's got to work with. That is the best unit of any unit on your roster. When you look at, let's rank the quarterbacks league-wide. Let's rank the receiving room league-wide, the offensive line league-wide. The only place that I really see where you guys are above average is that front seven. So he's got people to work with up there. They just have to be in a position where they can throw more tricks out there and be a little bit more creative when they're not playing from a deficit all the time. And so that's on the offense, not just the defense. It's a team game, and the offense can really help them out in the second half if they are leading in the first half.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up. As we talk about game flow here all the time, Warren, it really is important. You talk about the impact on the defense. It hurts your own offensive line, right? If the other team doesn't have to worry about you running the ball because you're playing from 2 scores behind, They can just do whatever they want in the passing game, and it really does change absolutely everything. One other issue I want to get with you from last year, which I thought was interesting. You talked about play action effectiveness, and this kind of goes to the early down stuff, where the Giants in play action were not nearly as explosive, especially as they needed to be. And you found that Jones was much better in shotgun play action than under center play action. Can you dive into that a little bit and why in those play action situations you should try to get the ball down the field a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, the whole goal with play action is to get that middle level of defense to bite up, try to get them to come down, and then you can pass the ball over the top of them. So you can create that separation, especially where they're either they're moving a step towards the line of scrimmage or they're hesitating, holding position, and your guys can get in behind them. All of a sudden there's a mismatch there based on alignment during a play. And that's really the way that you gain an advantage. But if you run play action, just dump it off underneath to one of your players behind the line of scrimmage, you are just playing right into those guys that are already coming downhill and then have the opportunity to just go and tackle these guys for short gains. And so one of the things I looked at, Daniel Jones splits when he passed over 5 yards down the field on first downs in the first half. If he used play action, he was 52% success, 9.8 yards per attempt. If he didn't use play action, 43% success, 5.8 yards per attempt. So that first down play action was helpful for him, but they were using play action at rates and throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage to players where it really wasn't beneficial. And since I've written this chapter, John, I performed a study league-wide about just the trend, and so I'll go ahead and kind of digress a little bit, but the trend in the league of throwing the ball short of the line of scrimmage and how the way defenses are playing more and more to prevent those big plays down the field. It's encouraging offensive coordinators to dial up plays where they're a little bit happier throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage and trying to then make something happen after that point in time, especially the way that these defenses are playing. And they view it as like an extension of the run game to throw these plays short. But the problem is those plays from an offensive side have been increasing. The rate at which they're throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage has been growing and growing and growing over the last decade. The efficiency of those plays has been shrinking dramatically. Those plays are getting less and less and less efficient because the way the defense is playing, it's preventing the big plays, but they're rallying up to those short plays underneath. And so offensive coordinators need to resist the urge of throwing the ball short of sticks. And here's the great kind of example. Last year, all 32 teams, every single team had negative EPA when they threw the ball behind the line of scrimmage.
Wow.
But 29 out of those 32 teams had positive EPA when they threw the ball beyond the line of scrimmage. Only 3 teams had negative EPA throwing the ball beyond the line of scrimmage, but every single team had negative EPA when they threw the ball short of the line of scrimmage. Even the 49ers, even the Kansas City Chiefs, even the best offenses in the NFL with the best quarterbacks, when they're throwing it short of the line of scrimmage, EPA was negative last season, and almost nobody had negative EPA if they just threw the ball 1-2 yards even down the football field. So offensive coordinators need to be a little bit more aggressive with how they're calling plays and not play into the defense. And the way to offset that is obviously calling more pass plays that go down the field as opposed to those short plays behind the line of scrimmage, which has been the trend. But number 2, in many cases, a simple run play. Like if the quarterback's at the line of scrimmage and he sees that this short screen pass or bubble, whatever you're going to throw, looks like it's covered up well, one word audible to the run play, because that run play is probably going to gain more efficiency than that pass play, which is fully covered. And secondarily, we just talked about those QB scrambles. Instead of throwing that pass, take your quarterback and just try to scramble for some positive yards. You're probably going to gain more yards that way than you are throwing these screens behind the line of scrimmage.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizens student loan can help you pay for 100% of your school certified costs. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay-for-college. Joined by Warren Sharp. Warren, you've mentioned Brian Daboll a couple times, and you had a nice little Twitter, I'll call it a rant, why not, about Brian Daboll last week. You just have a lot of respect for him as an offensive coach and the job he does with offenses. Can you just go into why you have such great respect for Brian Daboll and the way he puts an offense together and the way he coaches on that side of the ball?
Yeah, because I think that Daboll is one of the coaches in the league. There's a lot of younger offensive-minded head coaches and offensive coordinators coming out there who already understand the right ways to win games, like how you win games. And though things haven't worked perfectly here in New York from that regard, right? They're coming from behind. They're not playing from ahead. They're not doing some of the things that I would want them to do. Overall, I think Daboll is just working with what he's been given. And, when he was in Buffalo and had the opportunity, this was a team that was jumping out on you, that was playing aggressively. And I feel like he understands the ways to win games on the offensive side of the football. And games are won offensively. You could say great defenses rise up in the playoffs. We certainly saw that in the Super Bowl last year with the Kansas City Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo. But in order to get to that point, you need to outscore your opponent. You need to have efficiency. And we know offense is more likely to win games than defense is. Offense dictates, and Daboll knows how to call those plays. And I think Daboll is very adept. I think he understands the ways to win games. And so I was encouraged by the growth that he took Josh Allen on. Daboll was there in 18. Daboll was there in 19 when Josh Allen really wasn't good. He was trying to figure out how to win. 20, all of a sudden, a bunch of things clicked. Josh worked on his own. We know that he got some training, but Daboll stepped his game up too. And Daboll was calling things differently. They were attacking from a different philosophy. And I know that Daboll had to convince Sean McDermott that this is the way that they could play to win games. I mean, Sean McDermott at that time, 18 and 19, they had just gone to the playoffs, keep in mind, in 19. They lost to the Houston Texans with Deshaun Watson, I believe, that year. You had a defensive-minded coach in McDermott who wasn't sure if they wanted to pass the ball so much with the quarterback who really hadn't proven a whole lot. But the reality was that's the way to make it easier for your quarterback is to pass the ball a lot. And especially on those early downs when the defense is playing run.
And it's funny, just to kind of sum up this whole thing before we get into the strength of schedule. I love doing that with you. I feel like based on what they did this offseason, Warren, that to your point, Brian Daboll understands what they need to get better at, right? You add all these veteran offensive linemen, new offensive line coach, you draft Malik Neighbors. You have, again, you get to your point, you look at their roster strength. Well, they have a lot of young guys that haven't proven it yet, right? They need these guys that they drafted the last 2 or 3 years to take that next step to make the roster better. That's why you draft guys, right? So I think they understand where they need to go. They've tried to make the moves to get there, and now we'll have to see how it all plays out to see if they're able to do that. Before the strength of schedule, real quick, you mentioned you have optimism about what Shane Bowen brings defensively based on what he did in Tennessee. What are the things you like that Bowen's defenses did in Tennessee that you would hope he brings to the Giants?
So, well, just bottom line, like when I look at that Titans team in general, one of their weaknesses was their defense. If you look at the last several years, but this team was winning games. I mean, what Mike Vrabel was able to do in situations, and again, Vrabel's the head coach, so much of the credit goes to him. That defense, though, that defense was able to play well enough so that in games where they were expected to lose, they actually were successful in. They had one of the best against the spread records. They had one of the best records at upsetting opponents. This is a team that was feisty in a lot of games that they were expected to lose. And that feistiness didn't really start on the offensive side of the ball. It started on the defensive side of the ball by punching some of these teams in the mouth. Especially I think of like some of the games with Patrick Mahomes, right? Like where, what was it? Malik Willis went in there at the end of the regular season and was winning or tied late against the Kansas City Chiefs like 2 years ago. This was a team that got up to play against some opponents. And I think it was that mindset and that mentality of their defense. And for that reason, I think their defensive coordinator does deserve a lot of credit for that. I think he was creative with a probably talent that was a little bit below average on that side of the football. And I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table in New York. We know it's like inside of a family, like a functioning family, a functioning business. When there's forces working in opposition, it's hard to just get anything accomplished. And I know that there were some issues there last season between your defense coordinator and Daboll, and that probably was a strain on a lot of factors within that relationship, within the building, with regard to those sides of the football. I think a fresh start there on that side of the ball is going to be very beneficial for the Giants this upcoming season. And I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like. One of the things that I did not like, and I don't like it when, I'm doing a lot of analysis on the Detroit Lions and Aaron Glenn and how that pass defense moved from literally the worst pass defense in the NFL when they sent 5+ pass rushers to a top 10 pass defense. I'm talking about the Lions when they blitzed only 4 players, when they rushed their regular 4, didn't send an extra rusher, yet they blitzed at one of the higher rates in the NFL because that's what their defense coordinator, Aaron Glenn, likes to do. I don't like it when the defense coordinator has is known for something like that, is known for sending a lot of pressure, is known for the blitzes, because it becomes predictable at times. And we know that your defense coordinator was sending a lot of blitzes and became a little bit predictable in that regard. I want more change up from your defense. I want more surprise. I want more to make it harder on that quarterback after he snaps the ball, where he's not sure quite what that picture is going to look like. And so that's why I'm excited to see your new defense coordinator in action.
All right, let's do strength of schedule stuff to wrap things up here, Warren. Last year, the Giants played one of the toughest pass defenses in the National Football League. Just a lot of really good pass defenses, rushing the passer, EPA against the pass, stuff like that. This year, it's a little bit easier, but still not easy. It's still, I think, on the upper half of the league. 20th overall strength of schedule, but it is an easier schedule for the Giants defense. I imagine that has a lot to do with the fact that they're playing the NFC South. So just your overall thoughts on the impact the Giants' strength of schedule and the types of teams they have in their schedule could impact the season.
What I really like about their schedule, John, is that if you look at some of these opponents, Minnesota, obviously a rookie quarterback, the Colts are starting a second-year quarterback, so are the Carolina Panthers. But if you look at that NFC South, or you look at who they're playing in terms of the Seahawks or the Vikings this year without Kirk Cousins there, and the Colts, you're not looking at teams that like have a history of putting up high points per game. And so that could allow your defense to fare a little bit better and make things easier for your offense. If your offense can come out faster, to then keep things more in check. And now it's a coin flip game. And you would expect on average to win about 50% of your coin flip games. So that would be a benefit. The offense's goal is to get up early and help the defense so that they're in these coin flip games late, because you're not a great team, but you might be able to win enough of those coin flip games to feel good about yourselves this season. And like I said, who knows, sneak into the playoffs. But you do play a much easier schedule. I showed you playing the toughest offenses in the NFL last year. Your defense It was not easy. You played the second toughest pass offenses, the number one toughest overall offenses. This year, that drops down to 13th overall offenses, 11th overall pass offenses. It's even easier for your run defense as well. You play the 14th rated attack of rushing offenses as opposed to number 6 last year. So it's definitely going to be easier not having to play so many of those good offenses last year. And, it's going to be hard on your offense, your own offense, in terms of Daniel Jones and that offensive line. You, by my estimation, are going to play the number 3 toughest schedule of pass defenses. So this is where relying a little bit more on the run game, where you play the 26th toughest schedule of run defenses, should be able to help your rushing attack, having a little bit more balance. I mean, Saquon was there last year, and you played the 5th easiest schedule of run defenses, and you still didn't have a whole lot of success in that regard. So just because you play easier run defenses doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be leading and have the opportunity to run on them in the second half. But if you get up in these games, and now the playbook's open in the second half, going up against a lot of these poor run defenses could really help your offense fare a lot better. And so that's why it's vital, John, talking through this a little bit with you right now, makes it even more vital to jump out to early leads. Because when you are playing the 3rd toughest schedule of pass defenses, but the 26th toughest schedule of run defenses, being able to run the ball in the second half with a lead, as opposed to forced to pass the ball in the second half against those number 3 toughest pass defenses, vital. So you have to score in that first quarter to give your team an opportunity to win games in the second half.
Well, Warren, I'll just say, watching camp practice, we've had about 8 of them, I think we're up to, or practice number 7 was today. They are throwing the ball down the field a lot more, and this is against the Shane Bowen defense that runs a lot of 2 safety deep stuff, so it's not like you're playing a heavy man-to-man deal where you're going to have more options down the field. So I think from what I can tell, again, based on their offseason moves and what I'm seeing in camp, it seems like a lot of your evaluation with how they have to play in order to try to win games, I think they agree with it based on how I see them going about their business, and we'll just see if they can do it. Tell the folks one more time where they can find your book and how they can get that special Giants discount, Warren.
Yeah, just go to sharp.football, type that into your URL bar, and you'll be able to go to the page that you can grab a copy of the book. And it's 50% off, just over $15. I guarantee if you don't find it's worth it, $15, come knock on my door. I'm on Twitter. Ask for your money back. I'll happily give it to you. I think you're going to find a lot of information in there, make it well worth your while.
The information is great, Warren. Thank you so much for the time. We're about to get going on our little 6-month sprint here to the end of the NFL season. Enjoy it, my friend, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Thanks, John.
Warren Sharp joins us in the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.